Welcome back. I'm going to be reading ERAGON, Chapter 4, Dragon Tales. At dawn, the sun's rays streamed through the window, warming ERAGON's face. Rubbing his eyes, he sat up on the edge of his bed. The pine floor was cold under his feet. He stretched his sore legs and rubbed his back, yawning. Beside the bed was a row of shelves, covered with objects he had collected. There were twisted pieces of wood, odd bits of shells, rocks that had broken to reveal shiny interiors, and strips of grass tied into knots. His favorite item was a root so convoluted he never tired of looking at it. The rest of his room was bare, except for a small dresser and nightstand. He pulled on his boots and stared at the floor, thinking. This was a special day. It was near this very hour, 16 years ago, that his mother, Selina, had come home to Carvajal alone and pregnant. She had gone for 6 years, living in the cities. When she returned, she wore expensive clothes, and her hair was bound by a net of pearls. She had sought out her brother, Garrow, and asked to stay with him until the baby arrived. Within 5 months, her son was born. Everyone looked shocked when Selina tearfully begged Garrow and Marion to raise him. When they asked why, she only wept and said, "I must." Her pleas had grown increasingly desperate until they finally agreed. She named him ERAGON, then departed early the next morning and never returned. ERAGON still remembered how he had felt when Marion told him the story before she died. The realization that Garrow and Marion were not his real parents had disturbed him greatly. Things that had been permanent and unquestionable were suddenly thrown into doubt. Eventually he had to learn to live with it, but he always had a nagging suspicion that he had not been good enough for his mother. I'm sure there was a good reason for what she did. I only wish I knew what it was. One other thing bothering him. Who was his father? Selina had told no one, and whoever it might be had never came looking for ERAGON. He wished that he knew who it was. If only to have a name. It would be nice to know his heritage. He sighed and went to the nightstand, where he splashed his face, shivering as the water ran down his neck. Refreshed, he retrieved the stone from under his bed and set it on a shelf. The morning light caressed it, throwing a warm shadow on the wall. He touched it one more time, then hurried into the kitchen, eager to see his family. Garrow and Roran were already there, eating chicken. As ERAGON greeted them, Roran stood with a grin. Roran was 2 years older than ERAGON, muscular, sturdy, and careful with his movements. They could not have been closer even if they had been real brothers. Roran smiled. "I'm glad you're back. How was the trip?" "Hard," replied ERAGON. "Did Uncle tell you what happened?" He helped himself to a piece of chicken, which he devoured hungrily. "No," said Roran, and the story was quickly told. At Roran's insistence, ERAGON left his food to show him the stone. This elicited a satisfactory amount of awe, but Roran soon asked nervously, "Were you able to talk with Katrina?" "No, there wasn't an opportunity after the argument with Sloane. But she'll expect you when the traders come. I gave the message to Horace. He will get it to her." "You told Horace?" said Roran incredulously. "That was private. If I wanted everyone to know about it, I would have built a bonfire and used smoke signals to communicate. If Sloane finds out, he won't let her see me again." "Horace will be discreet," assured ERAGON. "He won't let anyone fall prey to Sloane, least of all you." Roran seemed unconvinced, but argued no more. They returned to their meals, in the taciturn presence of Garrow. When the last bites were finished, all three went to work in the fields. The sun was cold and pale, providing little comfort. Under its watchful eye, the last of the barley was stored in the barn. Next they gathered prickly vine squash, and then rutabagas, peas, and beets, turnips, and beans, which they packed into the root cellar. After hours of labor, they stretched their cramped muscles, pleased at the harvest finish. The following days were spent pickling, salting, shelling, and preparing the food for the winter. 9 days after Eragon's return, a vicious blizzard blew over the mountains and settled on the valley. The snow came down in the great sheets, blanketing the countryside in white. They only dared leave the house for firewood and to feed the animals, for they feared getting lost in the howling wind and featureless landscape. They spent their time huddled over the stove as gusts rattled the heavy window shutters. Days later, the storm finally passed, revealing an alien world of soft white drifts. "I'm afraid the traders may not come this year with conditions this bad," said Garrow. "They're late as is. We'll give 'em a chance to wait before going to Carvajal. But if they don't show soon, we'll have to buy any spare supplies from the townspeople." His countenance was resigned. They grew anxious as the days crept by without any sign of the traders. Talk was sparse, and depression hung over the house. On the 8th morning, Roran walked past the road and confirmed that the traders had not yet passed. The day was spent readying for the trip into Carvajal, scrounging with grim expressions for saleable items. That evening, out of desperation, Eragon checked the road again. He found deep ruts cut into the snow, with numerous hoof prints behind them. Elated, he ran back to the house, whooping, bringing new life to their preparations. They packed their surplus produce into the wagon before sunrise. Garrow put a year's money in the leather pouch as he carefully fastened it to his belt. Eragon set the wrapped stone between bags of grain so it would not roll when the wagon hit bumps. After a hasty breakfast, they harnessed the horses and cleared the path to the road. The traders' wagons had already broken the drifts, which sped their progress. By noon, they could see Carvajal. In daylight, it was a small, earthly village filled with shouts and laughter. The traders had made camp in an empty field on the outskirts of town. Groups of wagons, tents, and fires were randomly spread across it, spots of color against the snow. The troubadours' 4 tents were garishly decorated. A stream of steady people linked the camp to the village. Crowds turned around the line of bright tents and booths clogging the main street. Horses whinnied at the noise. The snow had been pounding flat, giving it a glassy surface. Elsewhere, bonfires had melted it. Roasted hazelnuts added a rich aroma to the smells wafting around them. Garrow parked the wagon and picketed the horses, then drew coins from his pouch. "Get yourself some treats. Roran, do what you want. Only be at horse in time for supper. Eragon, bring that stone and come with me." Eragon grinned at Roran and pocketed the money, already planning on how to spend it. Roran departed immediately, with a determined expression on his face. Garrow led Eragon into the throng, shouldering his way through the bustle. Women were buying cloth, while nearby their husbands examined a new latch, hook, or tool. Children ran up and down the road, shrieking with excitement. Knives were displayed here, spices there, and pots were laid out in shiny rows next to leather harnesses. Eragon stared at the traders curiously. They seemed less prosperous than last year. Their children had a frightened, wary look, and their clothes were patched. The gaunt men carried swords and daggers with this new familiarity, and even the women had poignards belted at their waists. What could have happened to make them like this? And why are they so late? Wondered Eragon. He remembered the traders being full and good of cheer, but there was none of that now. Garrow pushed down the street, searching for Murloc, a trader who specialized in odd trinkets and pieces of jewelry. They found him behind the booth, displaying brooches to a group of women. As each new piece was revealed, exclamations of admiration followed. Eragon guessed more than a few purses would be depleted. Murloc seemed to flourish and grow every time his wares were complimented. He wore a goatee, held himself with ease, and seemed to regard the rest of the world with slight contempt. The excited group prevented Garrow and Eragon from getting near the trader, so they settled on a step and waited. As soon as Murloc was unoccupied, they hurried over. "And what might you, sirs, want to look at?" exclaimed Murloc. "An amulet or trinket for a lady? With a twirl, he pulled out a delicately carved silver rose of excellent workmanship. The polished metal caught Eragon's attention, and he eyed it apprehensively. The trader continued, "Not even 3 crowns, though it has come all the way from the famed craftsmen of Bellatona." Garrow spoke in a quiet voice. "We aren't looking to buy, but sell." Murlock immediately covered the rose and looked at them with new interest. "I see. Well, maybe if this item is of any value, you would like to trade it for 1 or 2 of these exquisite pieces?" He paused for a moment while Eragon and his uncle stood uncomfortably, but then continued. "You did bring the object of consideration." "We have it, but we would rather show it to you elsewhere," said Garrow in a firm voice. Murlock raised an eyebrow, but spoke smoothly. "In that case, let me invite you to my tent." He gathered up his wares and gently laid them in an iron-bound chest, which he locked. Then he ushered them up from the street and into the temporary camp. They wound between the wagons to a tent removed from the rest of the traders. It was crimson at the top and sable at the bottom, with thin triangles of color stabbing into each other. Murlock untied the opening and swung the flap to the outside. Small trinkets, strange pieces of furniture, such as a round bed, and 3 seats carved from tree stumps filled the tent. A gnarled dagger with a ruby pommel rested on a white cushion. Murlock closed the flap and turned to them. "Please, seat yourselves." When they had, he said, "Now show me why we are meeting in private." Eragon unwrapped the stone and set it between the 2 men. Murlock reached for it with a gleam in his eye, then stopped and asked, "May I?" When Garrow indicated his approval, Murlock picked it up. He put the stone in his lap and reached to one side for a thin box. He opened it, revealed a large set of copper scales, which he set on the ground. After weighing the stone, he scrutinized its surface under a jeweler's glass, tapped it gently with a wooden mallet, and drew the point of a tiny clear stone over it. He measured its length and diameter, then recorded the figures on the slate. He considered the results for a while. "Do you know what it is worth?" "No," admitted Garrow. His cheek twitched, and he shifted uncomfortably on his seat. Murlock grimaced. "Unfortunately, neither do I. But I can tell you this much. The white veins are the same material as the blue that surrounds them, only a different color. What that material must be, though, I haven't a clue. It's harder than any rock I have ever seen, harder than even diamond. Whoever shaped it used tools I had never seen, or magic. Also, it's hollow." "What?" exclaimed Garrow. An irritated edge crept into Murlock's voice. "Did you ever hear a rock sound like this?" He grabbed a dagger from the cushion and slapped the stone with the flat of the blade. A pure note filled the air, then faded away smoothly. Eragon was alarmed, afraid the stone had been damaged. Murlock tilted the stone towards them. "You will find no scratches or blemishes where the dagger struck. I doubt I could do anything to harm this stone, even if I took a hammer to it." Garrow crossed his arms with a reserved expression. A wall of silence surrounded him. Eragon was puzzled. I knew the stone appeared in the spine through magic, but made by magic? What for? For why? He blurted, "But what is it worth?" "I can't tell you that," Murlock said in a pained voice. "I'm sure there are people who would pay dearly to have it, but none of them are in Carvajal. You would have to go to the southern cities to find a buyer. This is a curiosity for most people, not an item to spend money on when practical things are needed." Garrow stared at the tent ceiling like a gambler calculated the odds. "Will you buy it?" The trader answered instantly. "It's not worth the risk. I might be able to find a wealthy buyer during my spring travels, but I can't be certain. Even if I did, you wouldn't be paid until I return next year. No, you'll have to find someone else to trade with. I'm curious, however, why did you insist on talking to me in private?" Eragon put the stone away before answering. "Because," he glanced at the man, wondering if he would explode like Sloane, "I found this in the spine. Folks around here don't like that." Murlock gave him a startled look. "Do you know why my fellow merchants and I were late this year?" Eragon shook his head. "Our wanderings have been dodged with misfortune. Chaos seems to rule Glacia. We could not avoid illness, attacks, and the most cursed black luck. Because the Varden's attacks have increased, Galbatorix and his forces Send cities and more soldiers to the borders. Men who are needed to combat Urgals. The brutes have been migrating southeast, toward the Hadaric Desert. No one knows why, and it wouldn't concern us, except that they're passing through populated areas. They've been spotted on roads and near cities. Worst of all, reports of a shade. Some stories are unconfirmed. Not many people survive such an encounter. But why haven't we heard of this? Cried Eragon. Because, said Murloc grimly, it only began a few months ago. Whole villages have been forced to move because of the Urgals. They destroyed their fields, and starvation threatens. Nonsense, growled Garrow. We haven't seen any Urgals, and the only one that has horns is mounted with Morn's Tavern. Murloc arched an eyebrow. Maybe so, but this is a small village hidden by mountains. It's not surprising that you escaped notice. However, I wouldn't expect that to last. I only mention this because strange things are happening here, as well as you found the stone in the spine. With that sobering statement, he bid them farewell with a bow and a slight smile. Garrow headed back to Carvajal, with Eragon trailing behind. What do you think? Asked Eragon. I'm going to go get more information before I make up my mind. Take the stone back to the wagon, then do what you want. I'll meet you for dinner at Horst's. Eragon dodged through the crowd and happily dashed back to the wagon. Trading would take his uncle hours, time he planned to enjoy fully. He hid the stone under the bags, then set out into town with a cocky stride. He walked from one booth to another, evaluating the goods with a buyer's eye. Despite his meager supply of coins, when he talked with the merchants, they confirmed what Murloc had said about the instability in Iglesia. Over and over, the message was repeated. Last year's security has deserted us, new dangers have appeared, and nothing is safe. Later that day, he brought 3 sticks of malt candy and a small, piping hot cherry pie. The hot food felt good after hours of standing in the snow. He licked the sticky syrup from his fingers, regretfully, wishing for more, then sat on the edge of the porch and nibbled a piece of candy. 2 boys from Carvajal wrestled nearby, but he felt no inclination to join them. As the day descended into late afternoon, the traders took their business into people's homes. Eragon was impatient for evening, when the troublemakers would come out to tell stories and perform tricks. The troubadours would come out to tell stories and perform tricks. He loved hearing about magic, gods, and if they were especially lucky, the dragon riders. Carvajal had its own storyteller, Brom, a friend of Eragon's. But his tales grew. Hold on. I lost my place. Yes. Carvajal had its own storyteller, Brom, a friend of Eragon's, but his tales grew old over the years, whereas the troubadours always had new ones that he listened to eagerly. Eragon had just broken off an icicle from the underside of the porch when he spotted Sloane nearby. The butcher had not seen him, so Eragon ducked his head and bolted around the corner of Morn's Tavern. The inside was hot and filled with greasy smoke from spurting tallow candles. The shiny black Urgal horns and a twisted span, as great as his outstretched arms, was mounted over the door. The bar was long and low, with a stack of staves on one end for customers to carve. Morn tended to the bar, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The bottom half of his face was short and mashed, as if he had rested his chin on a grinding wheel. People crowded solid oak tables and listened to 2 traders who had finished their business early and had come in for a beer. Morn looked up from the mug and his cleaning. Eragon, good to see you. Where's your uncle? Buying, said Eragon with a shrug. He's going to be a while. And Rorin, is he here? Asked Morn, as he swiped the cloth with another mug. Yes, no sick animals to keep him back this year. Good, good. Eragon gestured at the 2 traders. Who are they? Grain buyers. They bought everyone's seed at ridiculously low prices, and now they're telling wild stories, expecting us to believe them. Eragon understood why Morn was so upset. People need that money. We can't get by without it. What kind of stories? Morn snorted. They say the Varden have formed a pact with the Urgals and are massing an army to attack us. Supposedly it's through the grace of our king that we've been protected for so long, as if Galbatorix would care if we burn to the ground. Go listen to them. I have enough on my hands without explaining their lies. The first trader filled the chair with his enormous girth. His movement caused it to protest loudly, and there was no hint of a hair on his face. His pudgy hands were baby smooth, and he had a pouting lip that curled petulantly as he sipped from the flagon. The second man had a florid face. The skin around his jaw was dry and corpulent, filled with lumps of hard fat, like cold butter gone rancid. Contrasted with his neck and jowls, the rest of his body was unnaturally thin. The first trader vainly tried to pull back his expanding borders to fit within its chair. He said, No, you don't understand. It's only through the king's unceasing efforts that on your behalf you're able to argue with us in safety. If he in all his wisdom were withdrawn, that support woe unto you, someone hollered. Right, why don't you tell us the riders have returned and that you've killed 100 elves? Do you think we're children to believe your tales? We take care of ourselves, the group chuckled. The trader started to reply with his thin compatriot, when his thin compatriot intervened with a wave of his hand. Gaudy jewels flashed on his fingers. You misunderstand. We know the Empire cannot care for each of us personally, as you may want. But it can keep Urgles and other abominations from overrunning this, he searched vaguely for the right term, place. The trader continued, You're angry with the Empire for treating people unfairly, a legitimate concern, but the government cannot please everyone. There will inevitably be arguments and conflicts. However, the majority of us have nothing to complain about. Every country has a small group of malcontents who aren't satisfied with the balance of power. Yeah, called a woman. If you're willing to call the Varden small, the fat man sighed. We've already explained the Varden have no interest in helping you. That's only a falsehood perpetrated by the traitors in an attempt to disrupt the Empire and convince us what the real threat is inside, not outside our borders. All they want to do is overthrow the king and take possession of our land. They have spies everywhere, and they prepare to invade. You never know who might be working for them. Eragon did not agree, but the trader's words were smooth, and people were nodding. He stepped forward and said, How do you know this? I can say the clouds are green, but that doesn't mean it's true. Prove you aren't lying. The two men glared at him, while the villagers waited silently for an answer. The thin trader spoke first. He avoided Eragon's eyes. Aren't your children taught respect, or do you let boys challenge men whenever they want to? The listeners fidgeted and stared at Eragon. Then a man said, Answer the question. It's only common sense, said the fat one, sweat beading on his upper lip. His reply riled the villagers, and the dispute resumed. Eragon returned to the bar with a sour taste in his mouth. He had never before met anyone who favored the Empire and tore down its enemies. There was a deep-seated hatred of the Empire in Carvajal, almost hereditary in nature. The Empire never helped them during the harsh years, when they nearly starved and its tax collectors were heartless. He felt justified in disagreeing with the traitors regarding the king's mercy, but he did speculate about the Varden. The Varden were a rebel group that constantly raided and attacked the Empire. It was a mystery who their leader was, or how they had formed the years following King Galbatorix's rise to power over a century ago. The group had garnered much sympathy as they eluded Galbatorix's efforts to destroy them. Little was known about the Varden, except that if you were a fugitive and had to hide, or if you hated the Empire, they would accept you. The only problem was finding them. Morn leaned over the bar and said, Incredible, isn't it? Incredible, isn't it? They're more worse than vultures circling a dying animal. There's going to be trouble if they stay for much longer. For us or for them? Them, said Morn, as angry voices filled the tavern. Eragon left when the argument threatened to become violent. The door then shutted behind him, cutting off the voices. It was early evening, and the sun was sinking rapidly. The houses cast long shadows on the road. As Eragon headed down the street, he noticed Roran and Katrina standing in an alley. Roran said something Eragon could not hear. Katrina looked down at her hands and answered in an undertone. then leaned up on her tiptoes and kissed him before darting away. Eragon trotted to Roran and teased, "Having a good time?" Roran grunted noncommittally, and he paced away. Have you heard the trader's news?" asked Eragon, following. Most of the villagers were indoors talking to the traders or waiting until it was dark enough for the troubadours to perform. "Yes." Roran seemed distracted. "What do you think of Sloane?" "I thought it was obvious." "There'll be blood between us if he finds out about Katrina and me," stated Roran. A snowflake landed on Eragon's nose, and he looked up. The sky had turned gray. He could think of nothing appropriate to say. Roran was right. He clasped his cousin on the shoulder as they continued down the byway. Dinner at Horst's was hearty. The room was full of conversation and laughter. Sweet cordials and heavy ales were consumed in copious amounts, adding to the boisterous atmosphere. When the plates were empty, Horst's guests left the house and strolled to the fields where the traders were camped. A ring of poles topped with candles had been stuck into the ground around a large clearing. Bonfires blazed in the background, painting the ground with dancing shadows. The villagers slowly gathered around the circle and waited expectantly in the cold. The troubadours came tumbling out of their tents, dressed in tasseled clothing, followed by older and more stately minstrels. The minstrels provided music and narration as their younger counterparts acted out the stories. The first plays were pure entertainment, bawdy and full of jokes, pratfalls, and ridiculous characters. Later, however, when the candles sputtered in their sockets and everyone was drawn together into a tight circle, the old storyteller Brom stepped forward. A knotted white beard rippled over his chest. A long black cape was wrapped around his bent shoulders, obscuring his body. He spread his arms with hands that reached out like talons and recited thus. "The sands of time cannot be stopped. Years pass whether we want them or not, but we can remember. What has been lost may yet live on in memories. Which yet you will hear is imperfect and fragmented, yet treasure it, for without it, you does not exist. I give you now a memory that has been forgotten, hidden in the dreamy haze that lies behind us." His keen eyes inspected their interested faces. His gaze lingered on Eragon, last of all. "Before your grandfathers' fathers were born, and yea, even before their fathers, the Dragon Riders were formed. To protect and guard was their mission, and for thousands of years they succeeded. Their prowess in battle was unmatched, for each had the strength of 10 men. They were immortal unless blade or poison took them. For good only were their powers used, and under their tutelage tall cities and towers were built of living stone. While they kept peace, the land flourished. It was a golden time. The elves were our allies, dwarves were our friends. Wealth flowed into our cities, and men prospered. But weep, for it could not last." Brom looked down silently. Infinite sadness resonated in his voice. Though no enemy could destroy them, they could not guard against themselves. It came to pass, at the height of their power, that a boy, Galbatorix by name, was born in the province of Inzilbeth, which is no more. At 10 he was tested, as was custom, and it was found that great power resided within him. The riders accepted him as their own. Through their training he passed, exceeding all others in skill. Gifted with a sharp mind and strong body, he quickly took his place among the riders' ranks. Some saw his abrupt rise as dangerous and warned the others, but the riders had grown arrogant in their power and ignored caution. Alas, sorrow was conceived that day. So it was soon that after his training was finished, Galbatorix took a reckless trip with 2 friends. Far north they flew, night and day, and passed into the Urgul's remaining territory, foolishly thinking their new powers would protect them. There, on a thick sheet of ice, unmelted even in summer, they were ambushed in their sleep. Though his friends and their dragons were butchered, and he suffered great wounds, Galbatorix slew his attackers. Tragically, during the flight, a stray arrow pierced his dragon's heart. Without the arts to save her, she died in his arms. Then were the seeds of madness planted. The storyteller clasped his hands and looked around slowly, shadows flickering across his worn face. The next words came like a mournful toll of requiem. Alone, bereft of much of his strength, and half mad with loss, Galbatorix wandered without hope in that desolate land, seeking death. It did not come to him, though he threw himself without fear against any living things. Urgals and other monsters soon fled from his haunted form. During this time, he came to realize that the riders might grant him another dragon. Driven by this thought, he began the arduous journey on foot back through the spine. Territory he had soared over effortlessly on the dragon's back now took him months to traverse. He could hunt with magic, but oftentimes he walked in places where animals did not travel. Thus, when his feet finally left the mountains, he was close to death. A farmer found him, collapsed in the mud, and summoned the riders. Unconscious, he was taken to their holdings and his body healed. He slept for 4 days. Upon awaking, he gave no sign of his fevered mind. When he was brought before a council convened to judge him, Galbatorix demanded another dragon. The desperation of his request revealed his dementia, and the council saw him for what he truly was. Denied his hope, Galbatorix, through the twisted mirror of his madness, came to believe it was the rider's fault that his dragon had died. Night after night he brooded on that, and formulated a plan to exact revenge. Brom's words dropped to a mesmerizing whisper. He found a sympathetic rider, and there his insidious roots took root. His insidious words took root. By persistent reasoning and the use of dark secrets learned from a shade, he inflamed the rider against their elders. Together they treacherously lurked and killed an elder. When the foul deed was done, Galbatorix turned on his ally and slaughtered him without warning. The riders found him then, with blood dripping from his hands. A scream tore from his lips as he fled into the night. As he was cunning in his madness, they could not find him. For years he had hidden in the wastelands like a hunted animal, always watching for pursuers. His atrocity was not forgotten, but over time, searches ceased. Then, through some ill fortune, he met a young rider, Morzin, strong of body but weak of mind. Galbatorix convinced Morzin to leave the gate unbolted in the citadel, Alaura, which was now called Urubin. Through this gate Galbatorix entered and stole a dragon hatchling. He and his new disciple hid themselves in an evil place where the riders dare not venture. There Morzin entered into the dark apprenticeship, learning secrets and forbidden magic that should never have been revealed. When his instructions was finished, and Galbatorix's black dragon, Shurikan, was fully grown, Galbatorix revealed himself to the world with Morzin at his side. Together they fought any rider they met. With each kill their strength grew. 12 of the riders joined Galbatorix out of desire for power and revenge against perceived wrongs. Those 12, with Morzin, became the 13 forsworn. The riders were unprepared and fell beneath the onslaught. The elves, too, fought bitterly against Galbatorix, but they were overthrown and forced to flee to secret places from whence they came no more. Only Vrail, leader of the riders, could resist Galbatorix and the forsworn. Ancient and wise, he struggled to save what he could and keep the remaining dragons from falling to his enemies. In the last battle, before the gates of Duru Urban, Vale defeated Galbatorix, but hesitated with the final blow. Galbatorix seized the moment and smote him aside. Grievously wounded, Rael fled to Utgard Mountain, where he hoped to gather strength. But it was not to be, for Galbatorix found him. As they fought, Galbatorix kicked Rael in the fork in his legs. With that underhanded blow, he gained dominance over Rael and removed his head with a blazing sword. Then, as power rushed through his veins, Galbatorix anointed himself king over all Aglacia, and from that day he has ruled us. With the completion of that story, Brom shuffled away with the troubadours. Eragon thought he saw a tear shining on his cheek. People murmured quietly to each other as they departed. Gareth said to Eragon and Roran, "Consider yourselves fortunate. I have heard this tale only twice in my life. If the Empire knew that Brom had recited it, he would not live to see a new month." And that is the end of chapter 4. Now we're on chapter 5, Fate's Gift, which I'll read at another time.